As we know, it is World Trade Organization. So when trade is taking place between the nations of the world, this particular concept of the institution, WTO, manages the dealings and the agreements which are there. It oversees all the dealings which are there between the nations. So we no longer say that we are in a state where it is a free trade, but there are a lot of restrictions which are being imposed on the nations of the world, where you talk about trade which happens. Now, these restrictions are imposed through different types of instruments which are there. So you call them as trade policy instruments, or you call them as restrictions, or you call them as barriers, so that you are restricting the citizens of a country not to buy products from the other country, or you are restricting the citizens of the country not to sell products to the other country. It's not completely that it's a ban, but there are some kind of restrictions which are being imposed. So let us see what these trade policy instruments are. There are basically a lot of instruments are there, but you can categorize the instruments into these ones: tariffs, then you have subsidies, import quotas, a voluntary export restraint, then you have content requirements, dumping policies, anti-dumping ones, and then administrative policies which are there. So we categorize them as, tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. Tariff is to do with money, rate. The very word tariff means rate. So whenever a barrier is there or a restriction is there, or you are the government of a country is intervening in the international trade by restricting the prices, or by controlling the prices of commodity, or by having any kind of an imposition on the prices of the commodity, then you call it as a tariff barrier. Then non-tariff barriers are the ones which are not related to the rates, but they are related to the other things which put restrictions, which could be in terms of quantity, it could be in terms of any other thing. 1 second. I don't have a class with you now. Class is later. 12. Yeah, because I'm in a session. So tariffs are basically taxes which are levied on imports, and these taxes basically go up to increase the cost of the imported products. So therefore, when the cost of the imported products are high, naturally people will hesitate to buy the imported product because of the high cost of that particular product. So tariff is basically any tax which is levied on the imports, so that the cost of that particular imported product goes up in comparison to the domestic cost. So these tariffs are again of different types. Basically, you can say these as a special tariffs and ad valorem tariffs. In case the taxes which are being levied are a fixed charge on any unit which you are importing, then you call it as a special tariff. And in case it is proportional to the value of the imported good, then you call it as an ad valorem tariff. So you have special tariffs, and then you have ad valorem tariffs which are there. So tariff is basically a tax which is being levied. Then you have tariffs which are also to do with, why is the government imposing tariffs? See, government imposes tariffs basically to increase their revenue, because when the cost of the commodity goes up and the importer is importing it and people are buying, actually foreign exchange comes to the point. Actually, when people buy, there is more of money which is being shelled out to buy the commodity. So therefore, you would have more money which is being circulating in the economy. 1 second, please. Right. So tariff and non-tariff barriers, as we will be discussing. I'm so sorry for the disturbance in between. So now, basically, when the government thinks about these barriers, which are tariff and non-tariff, tariffs are as taxes which are being levied. It is a rate or a change in the price or different kind of changes which the government approves so that it can have a control over international trade which is taking place. So those you call as your tariff barriers. And coming to why these tariff barriers are imposed by the government, we basically see that these barriers are basically imposed so that the government can improve their revenues, and domestic producers don't suffer much losses. On account of that, also the tariff barriers are being imposed so that you are protecting the interest of the domestic industries. Because the moment you have an imported commodity which is coming out, naturally people prefer to buy the imported commodity rather than the homemade commodity which is there. So therefore, in that sense, it becomes essential for the government to take measures to increase the rate of the imported commodity so that the domestic industries don't suffer. So in that situation also, government goes about levying the tariff barriers which are there. And also the foreign competitors, um, for these foreign goods which are there, they also charge a high price when they sell in the international markets, and consumers are ultimately have to pay a huge, high amount of prices which are there. So therefore, these tariffs are, basically you can say it is anti-consumer, because no doubt the producer is already charging a high price. On top of it, government levies these taxes and duties, and we end up paying a lot of huge amount of prices on these commodities. That's why you see all the imported goods which are there, they are all very expensive on account of these situations where the product itself is very expensive and the government also levies huge tariffs on that particular thing, which naturally increases the cost of the product. So the burden is passed on to the consumer there. So you have tariffs which are anti-consumer and pro-producer. But no doubt, it is also one of the measures of the government to draw intervention in the international trade. Then you have subsidies. Subsidies are basically, payments which the government is making to a domestic producer, because the domestic producer is suffering competition from the foreign goods. So therefore, it becomes necessary that this particular domestic producer is being safeguarded against the losses that he may suffer. So therefore, the government compensates the domestic producer by giving a subsidy to the domestic producer. So these subsidies will help them to pump up their production and to compete against the foreign products which are being imported in the market. See, in foreign imports which happen in a particular country, you can have foreign imports which can be true and genuine, where you are getting an original commodity which naturally will be of a high cost. On the other hand, the foreign imports can be also such which are fake products, counterfeit goods, where the quality will be very low and the cost also will be not very high. So that as a consumer, the moment you have a tag foreign, you would want to buy that commodity only. So the domestic producers will suffer. So what the government will do here is they will start giving subsidies to the domestic producer so that their interest is being protected in the international trade, and they do not have to suffer much because of imports which are happening in the particular country. So that way also protection is being given to the domestic producer. That is also a trade policy instrument which is being used. So the domestic producers don't have to feel that government is simply permitting foreign collaborations and foreign companies to sell in the country, and thereby they are being at a loss. So to avoid those kind of things, the government gives subsidies to the people. So you have domestic producers being protected. That is also one way. Then you have import quota. These are the earlier two one, the tariffs and subsidies are to do with money, whereas quotas are to do not with money but with quantity. So the barriers which you have got are related to tariff, where you have related to money, and then you have non-tariff, which are not related to money, but they are related to quantity. So you call them as quotas. So here you have first one, which is called as an import quota. Now, import quota is basically a restriction on the quantity of goods that may be imported into a particular country. You will not permit, the government of a country will not permit more than, say, for example, 1,000 tons of coal or 2,000 tons of wheat, or 10,000 units of laptops. So like that, you would have restrictions which are being placed on the quantity of goods that are being imported into the country. That you call as an import quota. That is also one kind of a restriction which is there. Then you have tariff rate quotas. Tariff rate quotas are basically a combination of quota and a tariff. So you have two things coming here. You have a restriction which is in terms of rate, also a restriction which is in terms of quantity. So these two types of restrictions are called as tariff rate quotas. Tariff rate quotas are basically related to a lower tariff which is applied to imports, within a quota than those of the other ones. That is simply giving quota, you would also give a lower tariff to import within that particular quota. For example, company A is permitted to import 1,000 units of a particular commodity X, provided that it is in this rate. So therefore, rate is fixed there, and you're also fixing the quota limit there. That's called as tariff rate quotas, which are available, which is a mixture of quota as well as tariff. Then you have voluntary export restraints. Voluntary export restraints are basically quotas on trade which are imposed by an exporting country at the request of the importing country's government. So as the very word says, voluntary. So the government is not imposing on its own, but because there is a request which is coming from the importing country's government, that is how the exporting country is imposing quota. So say, for example, you have India and Brazil. Now under BRICS, India and Brazil may be into an agreement where India may be requesting Brazil to put a limit on the quantity that is being exported. I'm so sorry, I'm in the college, and the environment is very natural here, with a lot of peacocks around and birds. I am in my room in the apartment in my cabin, but these peacocks are around in the morning, so that disturbance is because of them. Probably we would have to wait till they disappear from here. I'll just check up and come. Give me one moment, please. I just hope that the sound is gone now. Shoot away the peacocks there. Right. So we have voluntary export restraints where I was telling that, importing country's government can request the exporting country to impose some kind of a quota on the product that is being imported. I was telling that, under BRICS, if India and Brazil are into a contract, Brazil can request India that put restriction on the quantity that you are selling to our country. So voluntarily, the importing government is requesting or asking the exporting government to put restriction on the exports that will happen so that their country will import lesser when what they actually have to import. That is called as a voluntary export restraint. Then you have something called as a quota rent, which is nothing but an extra profit that the producers are making when their supply is being prohibited artificially. That means there's no natural scarcity, but the supply is limited artificially by the distributors who are there and the producers who are there. They are restricting the supply by themselves. So that's called as a quota rent, where producers end up making an extra profit, but that is not directly a restraint as such, but that is one of the measures which is used in international trade. So these are the various import quotas and all that you have. So who will benefit out of these quotas and voluntary restraints which are there? The domestic producers naturally, because you are limiting the import competition which is coming, and the prices of imported goods also will go up. So there is a advantage that they will receive. Then you also have something called as local content requirements. Local content requirement is also a type of restriction which is being imposed, where a specific fraction of the goods which are to be produced domestically, you will specify the kind of product that it should be produced, how should it look like, so that the consumers do not face any issues. So locally, whatever are the domestically produced goods which are there, government interferes in the domestic production by prescribing the requirements of the local content. So some specific fraction of goods to be produced domestically, whatever is the requirement in the physical sense, those requirements are being fulfilled. Those requirements are being fulfilled. So you call it as a local content requirement there. That is also one of the measures. Then you have administrative policies. Then you have something called as administrative trade policies. These are basically the bureaucratic rules which are being designed so that it becomes difficult for the importer to enter into the country. So the country's governments will have bans or restrictions which are being placed so that the importer does not enter into that particular country. So basically, consumers will not get high quality products into their country. These are restrictions which are there. Then you have dumping also and anti-dumping policies which are there. Dumping basically, selling in a foreign market at a lower price when compared to the market value of that particular commodity. Basically, what happens is because the countries of the world have got excess production with them, they have already met their local demands. So they, the extra production that they have already done, for that not to go waste, and for them to recover some money from the international market, they will sell the products in bulk, in excess, in other markets which are there, especially the underdeveloped markets which are there. So countries which are close to one another in terms of the physical locations, countries which are one country developing and the other underdeveloped, then the developing and the developed countries make advantage of the scenario there, and they will unload whatever is the excess production that has happened in their country in the markets which have been underdeveloped so far. So whatever is the excess production that is there, that goes off into the other countries. Like how we have, so much of Chinese goods which penetrated to India for last 10 years. All that is because of the dumping only. So you are selling in a foreign market below the cost of production.
and below the fair value, then whatever should have been the actual value of that particular commodity. So you call it as dumping there, selling goods in a foreign market. So governments also adopt anti-dumping policies so that the goods don't get dumped into the foreign market. So you practice, because the moment excess production of another country comes into your country and it comes at a cheaper cost, we all prefer to buy that. Now, I'm sure, in all our households, we have had a lot of Chinese products that we bought because they were very easily available to us, and they were all very less expensive when compared to, any other product that should be there in the market. So because it got dumped into our economy. But then government takes notice of it, and they formulate things which are called as the anti-dumping policies which are there. So anti-dumping policies are also being taken up by the government so that they are punishing the foreign firms which are engaging in the dumping practices which are there. Most of these anti-dumping policies are adopted by the developed countries: US, UK, Europe, Canada, Mexico also adopted it. India also adopted it recently in terms of many commodities which were getting dumped from China also. So anti-dumping policies are from the government side so that trade is restricted between the nations of the world. That is also one way of restricting anti-dumping. Now, when you have all these interventions which are there from the government side related to whether be it a tariff which is imposed, or whether it is a quota which is being imposed, or you have dumping which is an administrative policy measure which is adopted, there are questions as to why should a nation interfere in trade? Why should governments interfere in trade? Because there are arguments where people say that government's role is only welfare, uh, and government should function as a welfare state rather than indulging in political intervention in the economy of a country. So the government's role is not to interfere in the political economy, but then just to take care of the welfare state. So that way you have arguments which also support and which also oppose the case of government intervention. That is, why should there be trade policy measure, tariffs, quotas, and all that? There are both pros for it and cons for it, and arguments for it and arguments against it. If you see the political arguments which are there, we basically say that government intervenes because it has to protect the interest of certain groups of people within the nation, so that the other groups are not being exploited at the at the expense of them, and one group doesn't become richer when compared to the other group. So you are trying to protect the interest of people within your nation. That is why you have to have the trade policy measures, because if trade policy measures are not there, other countries of the world will resort to all types of practices of exploiting a country, coming and establishing trade colonies, because of which we as Indians were enslaved for a long period of time to British, because they came and they established their trade colonies. So here what happens is, when you are trying to protect the interest of your own people within your nation, naturally government has to interfere in international trade. And so politically it argued that interest of that group of people can be protected. So that's a political argument. Then you have an economic argument where you talk about benefiting both the consumer as well as the producer, so that the overall wealth of the nation itself increases. On one side, you are imposing a tariff and saying that imports to be restricted, and whoever is importing, let them pay more. So when more payment is going, or whenever you export also more, you put some restriction there. In both the situations, the government is talking about the amount of money which is being involved there. So the wealth of the nation is coming into picture. So you have arguments which are political and economic. So detail, if you have to see the arguments which are there, you say protecting jobs, protecting industries which are of national importance. Whatever is the unfair foreign competition which is coming, you retaliate that. Consumers are being protected against all kinds of dangerous products which may be dumped into a country. We have a lot of products which are very dangerous, and which where people have to be protected from, like you talk about currently, genetically modified foods and food on which experiments are being done. And when these don't have a demand in a foreign market, you try to send it off to another market on an experimental basis, and that could be dangerous to the health of the people in that nation. So you want to protect the consumers from dangerous products also. And as a part of foreign policy measures of a country, it can be entered there. And then economic arguments which are there, you are trying to protect the infant industry and take forward your trade policy in a very strategic manner. So you would have the instruments which are being implemented. So you see the infant industries which are there, and basically you would get a question on what are the different types of trade policy instruments. So you make a mention of the trade. These are domestic policies you don't have. Then you have GATT and WTO. So we will come to GATT and WTO now. This is more into international trade, where you say what institutions are there which are available for guiding and for guarding the transactions which happen between the countries of the world. So we say there should be some institution which is there available to regulate the activities of international trade. So we say that it can be done through your WTO, which is present. So let us study about what is WTO and how does it go about. Now, WTO was formed, post GATT. Earlier, GATT was functioning, which is nothing but General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. This was in the year 1947 that GATT was established. Basically, the main objective of formation of GATT was to liberalize trade globally. What has happened was there was this Bretton Woods conference, which was held in 1944, and that led to establishment of, as we all know, two institutions: IMF, International Monetary Fund, and then you have World Bank, which was called at that time as a World Bank and International Trade Organization. So later in 1946, IMF and World Bank came into picture. So 44 to 45 and 6, you talk about, the entire procedure of drafting and all those things. So this is how GATT came into picture at that point of time. Later in 1995, GATT was modified into WTO. So, because GATT was only an agreement, there was no structural control which GATT had. There was no administrative control that it had. It was only an agreement. So, whatever was written in the agreement, people were supposed to follow. But what if somebody violated? What if somebody is not doing? Any member nation has got some new issue to deal with? GATT did not have those powers. So, these members who were there in the GATT, they wanted an organization in the form of a framework and in the form of a structure where it should function not only as an agreement or a charter, but it should comprise of councils and it should comprise of bodies which will regularly meet. So then they started forming WTO. So WTO is actually the successor of GATT, we can say. So after the Bretton Woods conference in 1947, then came World Bank and IMF. Then after that came your WTO, which is there. So now if you see the structure and how it goes about, the development of WTO, which comes into picture. From 1995, January 1st, WTO came into existence. Initially, it was GATT and then later transformed into WTO. When GATT was meeting through different types of agreements, which were called as, GATT rounds. Whenever a meeting was being held by the GATT body, that is General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, they met in different parts of the country, in different countries of the world. And when whichever country they met, they called it with the country's name. So the last round, which was held of GATT, which was the 8th round, that was called as your Uruguay round. After the Uruguay round, which was being held only, WTO came into picture. So the member nations during the Uruguay round of GATT in the year 1944, in the year 1994, decided that there should be formation of WTO. So in January 1995, WTO came into existence with all the assets and the liabilities which GATT had, and those got transferred to WTO. And the headquarters still would remain the same, Geneva in Switzerland. So Geneva in Switzerland was the headquarters for WTO, and WTO committees replaced all the committees of GATT. So initially, we had GATT, and then GATT was functioning on the principle of non-discrimination between the nations, quantitative restrictions, consultations, and all those things. GATT was performing based on that. But WTO came into existence. Now, WTO is operated through the members, through the government representatives of the member nations. So, how many of our member nations are there? They will have their representatives becoming members of WTO, who will be a part of different types of bodies under WTO. So WTO has got committees and councils under it. So these members who are there, they all will be functioning under these councils and ministerial conferences which are there. So WTO's hierarchy, if you have to see, it has got a hierarchy of 4 levels from top to bottom. First one is called as the ministerial conference. Ministerial conference is the top hierarchy in the body or in the organization structure of WTO, where you will have all the member countries of the world who are members of WTO. They all will be members there. Now, this ministerial conference, the name of the body there under WTO is called as ministerial conference. This particular body will meet at least once in 2 years, and they will take up decisions which are related to broader strategies and broader policies. The broad framework of how the world should function in terms of trade, the broad things are being taken up by them. That is called as the ministerial conference. Then next body after ministerial conference is the General Council. General Council is basically an executive body. See, you have a ministerial conference, which is the body which is administrative. Then you have somebody who should execute the policies which are being made, right? So you have that body which is called as a General Council. So General Council is the executive body of WTO, which takes decisions, which implements the decisions which are taken by the ministerial conference. Here also you have representations from different parts of the world, whoever are the member nation. And General Council basically functions through 2 bodies which are there under it. One is called as Trade Policy Review Body Committee, and one is called as Dispute Settlement. So the Trade Policy Review Body Committee, what they will do, they will examine whatever are the foreign trade policies of the member nation. For example, India releases its foreign trade policy every year. So this particular body, which is called Trade Policy Review Body, this body will take care of the trade policy of India, which is that they will talk about what is the trade policy of India. If any nations of the world have got a trade policy which is dangerous for the world at large, then they will try to make the trade policy. They will try to make variations and suggest to the country to make variations in the trade policy. So this is the Trade Policy Review Body. Then you have Dispute Settlement Body. Dispute Settlement Body will be the one which will take care of any disputes, as the very word says, dispute settlement, where whatever could be the disputes which are there between the member nations, they are handled by the Dispute Settlement Body. So that is the second body which is there. So first highest body in the WTO is the Ministerial Conference, which will make policies. The second body is the General Council, which will execute the policy. General Council again has 2 bodies under them. One is the Trade Policy Review Committee, Dispute Settlement Committee. Trade Policy Review Committee will make a review of the trade policies of different member nations so that it is not damaging the world trade. And Dispute Settlement Body will talk about settling the disputes between the member nations. So you have these 2 bodies which are under the General Council. Then under the Trade Policy Review Committee, again you have 3 committees. Similarly, under the Dispute Settlement Council, you have 3 councils which are there. Under each one, three things are there again. If you see the Trade Policy Review Body committees, first committee is Budget, Finance and Administration. Budget, Finance and Administration is to do with, in what way, what kind of budgets are being made, and in what way the trade policy of any country has got budgetary allocations to it. That will be taken care by this particular body, which is called as the body related to budget, financing and administration. So they will take care of this particular thing. Then you have a Committee on Trade and Development. This particular Committee on Trade and Development, maybe I can share with you the structure there so that you have a better understanding. Just a second. Right. So if you see there, the highest body is the ministerial conference, where they usually meet once in 2 years, and all the ministers will be there of different countries. The topmost decision body, which is there, that is the first one. Then you have got under them General Council, which executes all the policies, and this basically functions through these two bodies. Dispute settlement, in case any disputes are there between member nations, they will settle, and then you have the trade policy body. Then you have the major thing is to do with councils and then committees, which are there. There are different committees, like internal committees, like how I was talking about budget and finance committee and the committee on trade and development. Then you have committee on balance of payments. They will take care of examining the budget allocations different nations have made for foreign trade, and what kind of balance of payment situation is there in different parts of the member nations, which are there. This particular council which is there, they have got sub councils in them. You have in the form of goods council, then you have got services council, and then there is council which is related to trips, that is trade related intellectual property rights, and then you have the council which is related to the committee which is related to negotiations, which will be there. These all will be taking care about their specific activities. That means if you talk about trips council, they will basically only take care about the IPR issues which are there. They will not be concerned with any other issues except the trade related intellectual property rights. That means to do with trademarks, copyrights, patents, industrial designs. Each member nation will have their own patents, copyrights, industrial designs, and IPRs, geographical indications, etc. So that particular council will take care of the trade related intellectual property rights. Then you have the services council and the goods council, two different councils which are there. One will take care of the tangible goods, the physical goods which are there, and the services council will take care about the trade in services, whatever are the professional services which are exchanged between the countries of the world: doctors, lawyers, engineers, teachers, professional services which are there. Or you say services in terms of banking, insurance, aviation. These are all also services industry. So the services council will take care about the items related to these things which will be there. Then you have the trade negotiation committee. Now when trade deals are being entered into between the nations, there should be one person who is external to the trading nations, so that that particular body takes neutral decisions in the interest of both. So the trade negotiation committee will take care about this particular activity. So that is their role, to see to it that, whenever trade pacts are being entered into between the member nations, those trade pacts are well monitored and well regulated by the bodies, so that they don't have to face any kind of issues which are related to one country having to take advantage at the cost of another country. That can be safeguarded when you have a trade negotiation committee, and that particular trade negotiation committee will take care about whenever agreements are being entered into, how does that happen. So as I was telling, it was in the last round of Uruguay of GATT that WTO came into existence in the year 1995. And as of now, if you see the number of countries in the world, we say that there are around 206 countries in the world, and majority of the countries out of that 194 countries are already member nations in WTO, except for few new countries which were being formed. But otherwise, most of the countries of the world are member nations of WTO. And then there are around 40 different committees and working groups. See, not only through the council, but they also function through working groups. That is very essential, because if WTO has to take up some decisions and trade trade policy negotiations or come up with some instruments, there will be a study group which will be appointed, and that particular study group will take care about the activities of whatever activities are happening. So the study group, or which are also called working groups, they will also be a party to that thing of WTO member nations which are there. That is the structure of how WTO actually appears, right? So then the major important things in WTO is that what does WTO actually do? So what are the functions and what are the objectives of WTO? The first objective of WTO says that, um, uh, implementing a system of world trade as was being visualized. How should world trade happen? So they try to implement a system of world trade, and they try to implement world trade in a manner that it is benefiting the entire world, not few nations and the rest of the nation, but the whole world should be benefited. So it talks about developing world trade in such a manner that the member nations are all being benefited out of that. Then it also ensures that whatever is the level of production and the level of productivity and the level of employment which is there in different parts of the member countries which are there, that also is being ensured through WTO. Standard of living of the people across the globe also has to be taken care, so that also is one of the agendas of WTO. Now all these agendas and objectives are being fulfilled through some of the functions that they perform. One function is they have to implement, they have to administer the various trade agreements which happen. Then they also provide a forum for negotiation. If WTO wasn't there, then where will the countries of the world get a platform to negotiate with one another? So WTO becomes a forum for them for negotiations. And it is also a forum for dispute settlements. When countries of the world have, disputes with one another with respect to multilateral agreements and trade agreements which are there, then WTO comes into picture and solves those disputes. So it is a dispute settlement mechanism it has got. Then its function is also to review the national trade policies, because it has got a committee which is reviewing the trade policies of different countries. So they have a role of reviewing the national trade policies and to see to it that the trade policies are in consonance with the global trade policies which are there. WTO basically functions on some principles. When you say how do they execute their functions, they basically function based on some principles. One principle is called as principle of non-discrimination. That means they do not discriminate in the member nations. All the member nations are same. Whether the member nation is rich or poor, new or old, the principle of WTO is that all the member nations should be given similar favorable trade terms, and that member nation, all of them have got to be treated equally. So non-discrimination and national treatment to all the countries of the world is being provided. So you have a policy of non-discrimination there. Then you also have a policy of transparency, because WTO's decisions are all being transparent to all the member countries. They also publish whatever are the new policy guidelines that are there on their website. They have policy reports and documents which they release from time to time. So there is a whole lot of transparency which WTO assures. And also WTO functions based on the principle of reciprocity, which means that when negotiations are happening between the governments of the world, the intention of achieving a mutually beneficial agreements between the member nations is very essential. So reciprocation, one does something and the other also has to do something in return for it. So you have the principle which is being upheld there. Then all these functions and all, no, the WTO usually performs, but there are certain what do you call bodies which are exclusively there as agreements of WTO. So let us come to what all are the agreements of WTO. The first agreement is Agreement on Agriculture. We usually call it as AOA, Agreement on Agriculture. Agreement on Agriculture was implemented for over a period of 6 years, which began in 1995 and went up to 2000. This particular agreement on agriculture was basically related to, this was one of the first multilateral agreement on agricultural sector, and this was related to imposing tariffs to replace the earlier restrictions which were there. Because through agriculture you have the sustenance which will happen to the world. You get all crop from agriculture, and our livelihoods and are all based upon staples which are coming from cultivation and agriculture. So there should be some agreement on agriculture. So AOA is the agreement of agriculture which came into picture, which was replacing all kinds of non-tariff barriers in the field of agriculture by tariff barriers. So all non-tariff barriers which were there, they were being replaced with the tariff barriers through the implementation of this AOA agreement. Also, this particular AOA agreement also was distinguishing between, what kind of agricultural support programs the governments were making in the different countries of the world. Also, to provide export subsidies, when you see export subsidies were being provided, but agreement on agriculture prohibited export subsidies except for a few exports which were taking place. So subsidies also were being exported. This is one very small agreement which is there on agriculture. Then you have agreement which is there on trade in services, which we call as GATS, GATS. GATT is different, that is GATT, which was replaced by WTO. Within WTO, you have an agreement called GATS, GATS. So GATS is an agreement which is called as General Agreement on Trade in Services. As the very word says services, it will talk about all kinds of rules and guidelines which are to be followed when the member nations of the world of the WTO, they have to follow the requirements which may be related to visa, which may be related to investment, requirements related to repatriation of whatever you have earned as a service professional in the other country, requirements which are related to recruitment of foreign nationals, restrictions on recruitment of foreign nationals, compulsions which you put on use of local facilities by them, and then in what way are you safeguarding your domestic industries which are into banking, insurance, and aviation and transportation, all these things. So GATS basically is about supply of a service. So from one country to another country, how does a particular service get supplied? Who is the service provider? How is the service getting supplied? Is it through transfer of people, natural persons, or is it through only the service which gets transferred? Like say, for example, you talk about GATS, and then there is software, which is a part of your intellectual property, and you need a professional to run that particular software. So here GATS will come into picture because there is exchange of people there. So you have modes which are there in GATS. First one is the cross-border supply. That means cross-border supply is nothing but covering service flows from territory of one member nation to the territory of the other member nation, like banking services, which are being supplied cross-border. Then you can also have commercial presence. One country can have a commercial presence in the territories of the other country. So you can have that also. You can also do agreements on GATT through something called as consumption abroad, where, for example, in tourism, you have a situation where the consumer, that means the tourist, he is moving into the territory of the other country. So therefore, you're not consuming the service in your own country, but the person is actually moving to the other country. He's not a professional. He's not a professional, so the movement is not based on professional. For example, he's not a banker that he's going there and working in a bank there, but he's a tourist. And then, or say, for example, a patient who goes for medical tourism, and then you go there and then you get treated for the disease that you're suffering, then that is consumption abroad. You are traveling from here to there to consume that service abroad. So that is also a part of your GATS. Then naturally, movement of people, which can be permanent movement, temporary movement. Permanent movement here is not settling permanently, but the status which is given to the person who's moving will be in terms of residential. That is, they are free to stay there for maybe 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, or some of them also get residency in terms of the citizenship, because they are being employed there on a permanent basis. So that way you would have whether the entry permissions are permanent or whether they are temporary in nature. So those things are also a part of your GATS. And here GATS covers different types of services, like all your business services are covered, like accounting, lawyers, auditing, bookkeeping, real estate, architecture, all of them are being covered. Communication services are being covered, like data processing, online communication, postal and courier services, anything to do with communication, postal and courier services, audiovisual services, television services, distribution and recording, all those things are also a part of your GATS. Then you have services which are related to construction, where you talk about civil engineering, assembly, installation, those are also covered. Then you have services which are related to distribution, like wholesale, retail, franchising, like how we have, yesterday we were talking about franchises. So you have distribution services, educational services, movement of people for seeking education, primary education, higher education. So you have education services, all types of financial services. Raising of capital, in underwriting, insurance, reinsurance, intermediary services, all of them will be a part of your GATS. Health related services, tourism related services, culture and sports related services, like how you have your FIFA World Cup currently going on in Qatar. So that's a part of your services only, which is to do with sports. So you would have GATS agreement, which has to be kept in mind when nations of the world invite one another to host a sports meet or any event. So because that becomes a part of your GATS agreement, which is there. So all these things will be covered under WTO when member nations have got dealings to do with services. Then the dealings which are to do with your things which are not actually tangibilized services, but then they are intellectual property. So for that, you have a separate agreement which is called as TRIPS, Trade Related Intellectual Property Rights. So the full form of TRIPS goes there, Trade Related Intellectual Property Rights. So now this agreement on trade related intellectual property right, this was actually developed in GATT only, that is the Uruguay round. Later, WTO gave it a form. So they define intellectual property as nothing but, the right which you are giving to a person over whatever is created by that person through his intellect. So if I make use of my intellectual capabilities and I make something, invent something, discover something, or make something new, then that will be the intellectual property which is created by me. So there you call as, the agreement which governs the intellectual property transactions which are there. So what all does it cover here? It covers all your patents. Patent is an exclusive right, which is granted to a country from the owner of the invention, so that they make use of the invention for a particular period of time. So maybe, for example, you have some new chemical process which is discovered, or some new circuit which is being invented, or any new vaccine or surgical equipment. All these things are being invented by somebody. Then your government is seeking a permission to use that. So you have to acquire rights from that country to make use of that particular invention. So you call that as a patent. Then you have copyrights, which are to do with, a right which is available for creation of an original literary or a drama or a music or an artwork. So when you have all these things put together, you call it as a copyright. Even computer programs and softwares are also covered under copyright. So when nations of the world are um, transacting with one another, for example, with respect to airing of a movie which is a foreign movie in your country, you have to acquire copyright to telecast that particular movie. Or for example, publications, records, photographs, books, when you are using, you have to seek permissions from the people who have copyrights over that, because it's a part of the intellectual property. Then you also have industrial designs, like design related to a car or telephone, personal computer. How does a laptop look like? Why should a laptop be like this only? So in case why should a laptop or a television set look like? Or how should a car look like? So when engineers are designing that, that becomes a part of your intellectual property. The design which they make is a part of it. Then you have trademarks, where you talk about, a distinctive sign, which is identifying the goods and the services which are being produced by a particular country. Like how we have signs which are used for brands. Say Nike has got a sign and Puma has it, and McDonald's have an M. So these are all called as trademarks, which are distinctive signs which are used for branding a particular product and also safeguarding the product. So that's a part of your intellectual property. You cannot make use of the sign unless the company permits you, because it's a part of your intellectual property. And WTO governs these trademarks through their TRIPS agreement. That is also a part of it. Then the newly added one to the TRIPS is geographical indications. Earlier it was not there, but it got added later. Geographical indications, like how, say, for example, we talk about reputation of a place because of a particular thing which is present in the place. Say Banarasi sari or Lucknowi chicken curry, work kurta, or like that. The name comes from the location or the region or the country in which it is. So there you call it as a geographical indication. So indications which are identifying commodities because the commodity has originated from a particular country, from a particular region, or from a particular locality. That, like how Hyderabadi biryani you have, so because it is originating in Hyderabad, and it gives an indication about the place here. So that way Hyderabadi biryani now is a part of your your intellectual properties, because it is giving a geographical indication. So like that you would have these things are also being governed under your TRIPS which are there. So these things are all related to TRIPS agreement. Then you have one more agreement which is called as TRIMS, which is related to trade related investment measures. Investment, what kind of investment should happen between the countries. So all things to do with investment will be covered under your trade related investment measures. How countries of the world invest with one another, and what guidelines should be there on investment. So basically you talk about foreign exchange balancing requirement, sales requirement within a domestic country, local content requirement which will be there, and economic integration of the nations of the world. So you have TRIMS also as a part of your trade related investment measures. More of it we will discuss about TRIMS in detail when we will talk about your foreign exchange. So next session that we will have will be related to your we left two topics in between, which was related to currency convertibility and foreign exchange. So we will go back to those two, and then we will at that time discuss in detail the one which is related to your TRIMS also. So WTO is done. Yeah, we have foreign exchange market, currency convertibility. These two things along with investment and the monetary system. These we will discuss together in the next session. This is my fourth session, I guess. How many sessions still are left? Based on that, I can plan my next two. 1, 2. Maybe I think I got another 2 sessions with you, Thursday, Friday. So in these 2 sessions, we will try to wind up your topics which are left over. Tomorrow, 3 topics, and day after tomorrow, 3 topics. So that will be covered. The small topics which are there within. You have the material with you in case you have any questions in whatever is being covered so far. You can just browse through because you can't read at once. So you just browse through whatever are the topics which are there. In case you have any questions, you can seek clarifications on the same in the last class which will come. So that way we can plan our next 2 sessions which will go. Yeah. Any questions in today's session? There's some disturbances, which were there in between.
Ma'am, I think today's session is 4th session.
Yeah, today's session is 4th.
Yeah. So
do I have 2 more, sir?
I think 4 more, because each subject has 8
sessions. 8
Yeah.
sessions. Another 4 more I have. Okay, so then
Yeah.
no issues. We can. I was thinking each subject has got 6 sessions. So that is how I thought tomorrow I'll take 2. So 8 sessions means not a problem. We are left with those topics. No, we will cover them up in the 8 sessions which are there. Tomorrow I'll take 10 to 12, sir. I am free from 10 to 12. So I will continue 10 to 12 and cover up things related to currency convertibility and the other part. The barriers we completed today, that is the trade policy instruments. So barriers, tariff and non-tariff barriers are being done. And WTO and tariff non-tariff barriers has been covered in today's session. Next session, we will talk about the foreign exchange management, currency convertibility. If time permits, we will go towards the topic which is related to your calculations. That is, how do you go? You don't have to work out. So calculations means don't think that there are problems to work out, but how does actually foreign exchange happen? The types of foreign exchange, FIA, FDI, FEMA, in detail, we'll talk about it in tomorrow's session. So do we have on Saturday also, sir?
Actually, as per schedule, only up to Friday, madam. In
Friday
the
only.
beginning, 2 classes are missed for this international business.
Yeah, it was later.
That's
It
why.
was come. Okay. So that's how it continues for next 4 days. Okay, no issues. So tomorrow, Thursday, Friday, we'll have again. We'll see Monday, Tuesday. So by Tuesday, we will try to
For
wind up.
Friday, you can take 2 sessions because other subject, entrepreneurship development, will be completed by tomorrow itself.
Acha. Tomorrow, can I take 2 sessions?
Yeah, I
Tomorrow?
think you can take, madam. You can.
Tomorrow also I can take. Okay, so I'll take 10 to 12. Then I'll take the last session.
Okay.
Last is in the afternoon, no? 2 to 4?
Yeah. 2:30 to 4:30.
2:30 to 4:30. So I'll go like that. Morning and afternoon I'll take. Yeah, better. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.